This is Duke University.
So I welcome all of you all here, and before I introduce our distinguished guest who has flown in from Minneapolis, just, leaving temperatures up there, she says, of -7. I said, well, tomorrow it's going to be 70 degrees here. And she's going back tomorrow.
And I have to go home, yeah.
she's got to go home. Anyway, before I introduce Christine, I would like to ask you all to do is go around the table and identify yourself so Christine will know to whom she's speaking. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Christine Morse is the president and CEO of the Margaret Cargill Philanthropies, which is has several entities which she'll talk more about. She has been, she knew Margaret Cargill and worked with her for 10 years before Margaret Cargill's death, starting in 1995, I think.
Actually, 91.
1991. And brings with her an intimate knowledge of the donor to this foundation. To me, it's a significant foundation, not only in its size, but it is, as you may know, I've said from time to time that most of the new foundations established, most of the new large foundations established since 1990 have been foundations with limited lives, spend-down foundations. This is, I think, the largest foundation that has been established as a perpetual foundation since 1990, which so that its assets are, I don't know, at this point, $3 or $4 billion already paid in. Is that right?
Actually, $7 billion.
$7 billion. it grows faster than every year. A billion here, a billion there, et cetera. So it's $7 billion it's there. And it is working in a number of different areas. And Margaret is going to tell us more about how Mrs. Cargill thought about these issues and how they've been trying to implement her desires over the course of the last, since the foundation was created. So I should also say that Margaret has a remarkable daughter by the name of Christy. Nora,
I have
you're Christy. Yes, Christy. Sorry, Christy has a remarkable daughter by the name of Nora, who graduated from Duke last year with a master's in public policy and a master's in environmental management, who is now working with the McKnight Foundation, also in Minneapolis. So it's now my pleasure to present Christine Morse, the head of the president and CEO of the Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Well, I am absolutely delighted to be here. I was certainly honored when Dr. Fleischman asked if I would come and talk to you today to talk about something very near and dear to my heart, the Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies, and what makes our philanthropies a bit different than perhaps some of our peers. To understand the structure, I think we need to go back and, or rather to help you understand what we do, how we do it, you need to understand what our structure is. And to do that, I have to go back to what Margaret wished us to do and our values and her values. And so we'll go back a little bit in history. That is Margaret and I at a much younger age. I met Margaret through letters in 1991 as my role was that of an advisor to the family office, and that family office was created to serve the Cargill and Macmillan families, and they are the owners and descendants of the two men that founded the agribusiness, what is now a giant company, Cargill Incorporated. Margaret was the granddaughter of W.W. Cargill. She came to philanthropy late in her life. And in the early mid 1990s, she gave generously, but she also gave completely anonymously to organizations that were important to her in the San Diego area. She lived in La Jolla, and she lived there most of her adult life. And her desire to remain anonymous while she was increasing the level of her giving was something that we decided really needed some more planning. So we needed to do some personal financial planning and some estate planning. To begin this planning, Margaret leaned heavily on me and on the wonderful friend of hers and lady who became my co-trustee, Kathy Hopper. And Kathy was, at that time, the retired assistant superintendent for San Diego school system. So a very bright and accomplished woman in her own right. So Kathy and I made sure that Margaret had access to all the financial and legal and finance kinds of resources that she needed to bring her legacy, or the legacy she wanted to leave, to bring that to life. The process resulted in the creation of her first formal philanthropic organization, and that was the Akaloa Resource Foundation, which we formed in 1995. Akaloa was set up as a supporting organization, so it had a designated list of potential grantees in its formation documents, and these beneficiary organizations were selected by Margaret, and they were selected because of the work that she knew they were doing in her areas of philanthropic interest. They were organizations that she was familiar with. Akaloa is not, and was not, legally required to fund each and every one of the organizations on that list, but as a supporting org, it cannot fund any organizations that are not on the list. Just to give a little bit of history there. So Akaloa grant making started slowly. Kathy and I both had limited background in philanthropy, and we knew that we had much to learn before we began the process. So we started our due diligence work by getting to know the organizations that Margaret had selected and that Akaloa had in its formation documents. This was also an opportunity for us, while Margaret was living, to better understand her interest areas and to see firsthand what kinds of projects and the giving philosophy that she wanted and what she wanted done when she was gone. This was something, her philosophy, her attitude toward philanthropy was something that we had documented later and put into what we term now in our organization her guiding principles. So some of these principles included a desire to help others help themselves, to be willing and in fact pay attention to low attention issues and to low attention and underserved areas, to work at a more individual and community level rather than a policy or advocacy level, to consider innovative approaches and to accomplishing her goals, including technology. These and others of her principles helped shape our grant making then and help shape our grant making to this day. As Akaloa began operating, we continued at that point in life working on her personal financial and estate planning. She made the decision that she wanted her considerable wealth to go to philanthropy, to provide the resources that allow people to do good work and to make positive change in the world. That decision led to the creation of a second philanthropy, and this was the Ray Charitable Trust. Margaret's wealth was consisting primarily of Cargill stock, and that stock was held by two trusts. Those trusts were set up by her father, and the trusts contained certain restrictions in them and in their terms, which required some very careful structuring of the philanthropic entities into which she could direct her funds to flow. So in 1996, to provide a vehicle to expand her philanthropy even more, we created the Ray Charitable Trust, which was named after her mother, whom you see in the slide up there. Ray was also set up as a supporting organization with a designated list of grantees. About half of them also had been named in Akaloa. So similar to Akaloa, those named beneficiaries were selected for their ability to work in the program areas that she was interested in. Because Margaret understood that Akaloa's fund size, asset size, was not going to increase after her death. We put dollars in it during her lifetime, but it was not to receive any stock at her death. So she wanted to ensure that some of the larger organizations that she was concerned about, and particularly wanted to support, could be included in another vehicle, and thus we created the Ray Charitable Trust. So from 1996 on, both Akaloa and the Ray Trust slowly started increasing and ramping up their grant making. They were relatively small then in our terms, and so they really weren't well known other than to their grantees. I should say too that their grantees knew the names, Akaloa and Ray, but they were not given insight into the person behind those organizations by design. And they were, in fact, I spoke to the leaders of our grantees and said, you really, if you find out who it is, you really need to not make that known, because if you do, you will not receive any more funding. And needless to say, that was very good incentive. And only one grantee did make the mistake and actually published a piece of paper with Margaret's name on it, at which time we called up and said, well, just so you know, this is the reason you're not going to receive any funding. And they also had other internal issues which they resolved. And once those were resolved and we had clarified our stance on the anonymity issue, then they again received funding because they are doing important work in San Diego.
What does Akaloa mean? Where is San Diego?
That was one of the reasons we chose it, because people didn't know what it meant. And they had no idea. Margaret, whether this is accurate or not, I cannot swear, but Margaret felt that it was a native word which meant wind through the pines. And she had a home in the mountains in California that she treasured and loved to go up there to hear the wind through the pines. So that's what we named it. Meanwhile, all this is going on and Margaret's estate planning is continuing. She wanted to provide more flexibility after her passing so that her funds could support a number of organizations that may not have been listed. The supporting organization structure also didn't particularly allow for what we would consider might be the unseen. If two NGOs were to merge and then begin doing work that was not in her interest area, for example, or if one went out of existence, or something like that, where it was no longer doing what she wanted it to do. So because she wanted that flexibility, and at the same time, Kathy and I were urging her to allow us to use her name to be after her death, I would say we completely not only respected but promoted her desire to be anonymous during her lifetime. But we also felt real strongly that her incredible kindness and generosity needed to be recognized at some point. So she did agree to name a traditional and private foundation, the Margaret A. Cargill Foundation, to come into existence at her death. One of the two trusts that I mentioned earlier was designated to fund this foundation. The other trust was designated to have its assets go into the Ray Charitable Trust. Margaret passed away on August 1st of 2006, And it took us, not surprisingly, almost 5 years to settle her estate. During those 5 years, actually the following year, Kathy also died. So prior to both Margaret's and Kathy's death, we had identified Paul Bush as a person who would be her successor. Paul was one of the advisors who helped Margaret document her philanthropic priorities. And that was when I referred to earlier that we had a couple of people come in and talk to her about her priorities and document. He was one of them. Today, I am delighted to say that Paul is not only my co-trustee, he has actually been promoted to be the president. I remain chair of the board and CEO, but he is now president of the philanthropies. The Margaret A. Cargill Foundation that I refer to here launched a limited grant program in 2009 based on what we had then as liquid assets of the foundation. We wanted to begin grant making because Paul and I both felt we needed to learn more about what kinds of expertise we needed to have on staff for the future. So we did a wide variety of grants. We employed a consulting firm to help us do due diligence so that we could make some wise choices, but also did it with an eye to learning. Our path to liquidity in grant making in May, actually on May 25th of 2011, it was watershed day for us. That spring, Margaret's estate had finally settled, and the assets of the two trusts flowed to the Ray Charitable Trust and to the Margaret A. Cargill Foundation. And as you remember, I indicated that those two trusts held the stock of Cargill Incorporated. Cargill is a privately held company, and so its stock is not publicly traded, and there was no ready market for us to go to obtain the liquidity we needed for grant making. So one of our big challenges after Margaret passed away was to find a way to monetize those shares. In May 2011, after, I must admit, numerous years of negotiation and planning, we entered into a transaction with the company, and our Cargill stock was exchanged for shares of a publicly traded company that they owned the majority of, which was Mosaic. During the balance of 2011, both Ann Ray and what we affectionately call the Mac Foundation sold about roughly half of their shares back to Mosaic. We have continued to sell our shares, liquidate our shares of Mosaic in an orderly fashion since that time. So once we got that done, we were able to increase our attention to focus more on grant making. Margaret Cargill Foundation began grant making in earnest with the environment program. That was the first program we developed, and the first grants that we made shortly after our liquidity transaction were to NGOs working in the Great Bear Rainforest of Western Canada, the Tongass region also of northwestern Canada and Alaska, and also the Micronesia Conservation Trust. All three of those grants were to support community-based work and conservation efforts in the regions where people, and particularly in those regions where people are highly dependent on either wild fish or other wild resources for their livelihood, as well as their cultural identities. By the end of 2011, we approved a grant to support a major new initiative in community-based conservation of coral reefs and fisheries in Indonesia, which you may know is one of the most biodiverse marine areas in the world, and also a major population area where fisheries are key to the people's daily life. So environment was followed fairly quickly by our Relief and Resilience program, which made 9 grants initially to the flooding areas in North Dakota, also to tornado areas in Minnesota, Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Alabama. Grantees included a number of faith-based organizations, Lutheran Social Services of Minnesota, which offered counseling to children who had been traumatized by disasters, the Community Foundation of the Ozarks, which responded, as you may recall, directly to the Joplin tornadoes, and the Mennonite Disaster Service, which responded to tornado problems that were happening in all 4 states. These disaster-related grants, I think, are a really good example of what we did at the beginning of our process, which was a gap analysis. Our research showed that natural disasters on the East Coast, on the West Coast, on the South Coast of the United States all received significantly more media attention than the disasters that were happening in the rest of the United States. And so we chose to create our domestic relief and resilience program to focus on what Margaret would have called a low attention area, one where there was not media attention, bringing dollars for support for people who had been, who were in a difficult situation. So a portion of our relief and resilience program intentionally focuses on our country's midsection, and another portion is a global piece. Following relief and resilience, we began our arts and culture program. And that we started with her interest area of native arts and cultures, and we began it in the Pacific Northwest in 2012. Since then, each of these programs has continued to build out their grant-making portfolios. We have also launched an aging services and an animal welfare program on a domestic basis, and we're currently funding exploratory and learning grants around health issues and some major ones regarding children and families globally. I have some charts which are hard to read, but they give you an idea. These charts track the growth of our grants awarded by our 3 entities. One is based on dollars, and one is the number of grants. You will see the Margaret A. Cargill section it could be a little bit misleading, but it reflects our 2009 grant program, which actually encompassed payouts over 5 years. And it was to 500 nonprofits, approximately 500 nonprofits that we had chosen. It's interesting, the growth. In 2010, before our formal programs were launched, but not including the 2009 numbers, the MAC Foundation awarded 14 grants with a total of $4.9 million. By last year, 2014, we awarded 139 grants for a total of $186 million. At the same time, the Ray Charitable Trust ramped up its grant making to its named beneficiaries. In 1997, we gave 2 grants with a total of $236,000, compared to last year when the trust awarded 60 grants totaling $145 million. So by last year, grant making for all 3 of our organizations totaled over $330 million. Along the way, our MACP, as we call ourselves internally, the Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies staff, has grown from, as I said, originally a team that could sit around a very small coffee table to 75, and now I believe we're at 77 staff. So in addition to building our program teams, We have also built strong shared services teams. We have legal, finance, human resources, grants management, investments, evaluation, strategic planning, facilities management, and communications. And those are all shared between all three entities, as we wanted to make sure we were spending our administrative funds as efficiently as possible.
Which one of those buildings is the mortuary?
Oh, oh, none of them. The one on the left-hand side is the original building we remodeled, and on the right-hand side is a picture of the expansion, which we are basically tripling the size of where we started.
And it's outside, this is on the west suburbs of Minneapolis.
Yeah, yeah. And the buildings actually are right on the edge of a preserve. So there's protected wetlands behind us. There's a road on two sides and protected wetlands on the other two sides. We're trying to, and I was telling Dr. Fleischman, our original building, we could only reach LEED Gold because it was an existing structure, but our new buildings will both be LEED Platinum. We believe in living our mission, so trying to put our money where our mouth is. So I was asked to talk to you a little bit as well about what makes us different. You know, one differentiator is obvious. We have 3 legally separate grant-making entities, but they do operate with one common mission and values. And in fact, in the last few years, we have documented our shared philosophy of grant making. Our areas of focus and what we are interested in achieving are in fact the same across all 3 entities. How we go about expressing that, our mission, is different by necessity. As I indicated, Anne Ray and Akaloa approach grant making through the lens of those designated beneficiaries, while the Margaret A. Cargill Foundation does so through well thought out and defined program strategies. There are a couple other things that set us apart. We consider ourselves to be stewards of our founder's values and of her style and her vision. Most foundations, I would guess, say this, but for us it is really at the heart of how we operate. And so I really felt that I needed to emphasize that. We went through a branding exercise and took the documents that had been prepared during Margaret's lifetime and spent many months talking about those expressions of her values and putting them into this format so that they can be shared. We started with the documented wishes that she did, and the values are also critical because they came directly from her. They are certainly, and were certainly during her lifetime, shared by me. We were very close friends, and shared by Kathy. But the most important thing is that they came right from her. And she wanted her future, the people who run her organizations in the future, to also have an understanding of her values, and also to exhibit what she said in our documentation was some values in how they live their lives. So she said, when you look for trustees and board members, she gave us a list of things. So I'm going to just read them to you because it gives you a little bit of a flavor for her and the way she thought. Number 1, she said, they must be able to be thinking of others always. Honest, direct, they must be nice. They must treat others with respect. Make sure that they can handle problems. Make sure that they can keep confidences. That was her own personal experience and how important that was to her. They should be spiritual. They should be easy to talk with and have broad interests. They should be active in their communities. And finally, just make sure they're bright.
It's like Prairie Home Companion.
Yes. That's where she grew up. Very close to Lake Wobegon.
Lake Wobegon.
You would be amazed how many people I know that grew up in Lake Wobegon like myself, yeah. You'll note that this list closely correlates to our organizational values. We have spent a great deal of time, as I said, making sure that those values are expressed in a manner that applies to us as employees within the organization and applies to how we do our work every day. If you look at our definitions, you will see that they are actions. We expect our employees to demonstrate these actions. We communicate that expectation repeatedly, from job interviews when we look to candidates, from onboarding of new hires, to incorporating them in our strategic planning and in our program evaluation. As an example, day one of an employee's onboarding process includes a discussion of this values document. And within 2 weeks, our new hire has one-on-one meeting with our branding leader to walk through the brand platform and how that platform comes from our values. Our brand is engage, build trust, make a difference. And we ask all of our employees to know that and to understand how we want to express it in the world. So as we build program strategies, we ask how a given approach is going to address our core values and the difference in the world that Margaret and we want to make. As we evaluate potential grantees, we examine not only whether their work reflects the values that we have surrounding excellence and making a difference, but also whether how they do their work reflects respect for their partners, and respect for the people and the communities in which they operate. Another difference is that the supporting organization structure is really quite uncommon, and especially those supporting organizations that have a mission like ours. Most of support orgs are set up to fund a single entity, a large hospital or a university like yourselves. Akaloa, however, has 14 named beneficiaries, and Ann Ray has 11. So it's very different from the typical. 7 of those are overlapping between the two organizations. We received our approvals to be supporting organizations near, I guess I would say probably near the end of the time in which the IRS was more regularly approving multiple named beneficiaries. So we do find it a little bit difficult, a little bit hard to compare ourselves to our peers, because there aren't a whole lot of organizations that look like we do. We believe that, on the other hand, the Margaret A. Cargill Foundation's approach to developing grant-making strategies is also a little different. We developed our strategies after carefully reviewing and thinking about Margaret's areas, and then we went through a process where we engaged a consulting firm that had experience in the philanthropic sector to do an analysis of what work was being done in the field, and then also to do what I call a gap analysis, to tell us what the issues were that were out there that were not being addressed. Our consultants then wrote a white paper that summarized their findings. And then next in the process, we invited a group of people from all kinds of backgrounds, basically, to read the paper and to review it and come together for one day, a meeting, where the consultant would facilitate a discussion around what we were thinking might well be a strategy for our program area. Those participants, I'm going to name some of the backgrounds because then you'll understand the next comment, were from academia, from science, from other NGOs, from other funders, from state agencies, practitioners in the field, for instance, artists or community-based workers. And then we also invited some specialist consulting organizations, like a TCC group or Arabella Philanthropic Advisors. And because they came from these different backgrounds with different perspectives on the subject area we wanted to talk about, I attended all of these, and I can tell you that the discussions were nothing less than animated and certainly informative. Paul and I just sat in the back and listened and let them discuss among themselves, and then their feedback was recorded and brought back, and we looked again anew at the white paper and what areas we wanted to have a strategy and where we thought was appropriate for MAC to be involved. So I think it's important that I say that usually our overall program strategy was developed like this prior to our hiring a program director. And that was because we felt that the strategy we chose would help determine the kind of expertise that program director needed and what we wanted that person to bring to our foundation. So the Margaret A. Cargill Foundation rolled out programs over time, not all at once. We developed strategies one by one and spent about 18 months working on a strategy prior to doing any grants with it. To date, we've utilized 12 advisory panels that I described, and in our program areas that we have ramped up. Now we're analyzing those strategies that we started at the beginning to see how they're playing out and to help us learn and shape our continuing strategies going forward. Another difference, we believe, is that we value our grantee partners in a manner that is actually unique. We look to central grantee partners, and I emphasize the word partner, because they help us shape what we do. We identify a problem or an issue that's of interest to us, and then we identify organizations that are addressing that issue on the ground, in the community, and in a manner that's consistent with our values. We communicate to those grantees what we consider important, but we don't go to them with a specific implementation strategy that we've developed, because we believe that we work with grantee partners to help find solutions. And they are the people who are, as Margaret would have said, doing the good work. And so if we can work with them to find solutions that are consistent, both with our objectives and their objectives, where our missions overlap, we will have far more impact.
And that's particularly the central grantee partners.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. And it's obvious so for Akaloa and Ann Ray who those grantees are.
Yes.
They're listed in our formation documents as our designated beneficiaries. But I think the unique thing is we're taking that methodology, that approach, and using it in our private foundation.
Right.
So we try to view the majority of our grantees as long-term partners and organizations that we can work with over many years to achieve common goals. We also, another thing that may make us a bit different than others is that we choose to stay away from public policy. Heresy, I know, but true. And this also reflects Margaret's desire. She clearly expressed her wishes to make a difference and touch people's lives. I guess that's the best way to put it. To make a difference in people's lives by supporting work at the community level. Clearly, public policy is incredibly important, and we respect and admire the work that our peers do, and that's great. It's just not our focus, which is okay.
I was going to ask you why.
It's okay. We look for opportunities because of this, in fact, not only because of this, but one of the reasons, to collaborate with our peers, because we may fund, for example, basic scientific research in community. As an example, I was in Vietnam and Cambodia a few years ago where we were working with communities, and the fishers, the people who are out there line fishing every day, were being taught how to keep track of what species they were catching, what volumes, what weights, everything like that. And our peer organization was with me on the same trip. They would then take that information and use it in their discussions with the government, the people who are doing policy, and those policies affecting these communities.
Well, I mean, I note that the Nature Conservancy is, of course, one of your large grantees,
It is,
right?
yes.
And they do a lot of public policy work.
They do.
Right.
But we don't fund that part of them.
I see. Money's fungible.
Yes, it is. But we also have high levels of accountability.
Oh, right.
And so we know where our money goes. Yeah. But we do work with some of our peer funders who, who have expertise in going to the government,
right,
or working with NGOs that have expertise going there. That just is not our expertise, and it was not our mission from Margaret. So we acknowledge how important it is. We just also acknowledge that when you go to think about public policy, you hopefully do it with good science or good information underpinning it. Another thing is that we don't accept unsolicited proposals, and we're certainly not unique in that, because we know that many of our peers do the same kind of thing. In fact, when you look at all the factors that I've mentioned, probably none of them are totally unique, but we do think that the combination of them and how it affects how we behave in the world is different. These approaches reflect our founders' guidance and priorities, and our own priorities and comfort level, and they actually allow us to maintain an organization that I believe will stay true to her intent. It's important, I think, to remember that no philanthropy, no matter how big and no matter how well-intentioned, can solve all the problems of the world. We do think it's important that we identify where we can make a measurable difference, given our assets and given our founders' guidance, given our priorities and our opportunities and our skill sets. This is also, to me, a matter of fiduciary responsibility. To me, it is a matter of making a commitment to a woman that I cared very deeply about. As I tell my staff, I do my job because I made a promise and not because I need a job. And I made a promise to someone I love dearly. So as stewards of Margaret's legacy, we have to, all of us in our organization, consider it a fiduciary duty to use our assets to make a difference in the areas of interest that she gave us, and by thoughtfully choosing our strategies and also by thoughtfully learning from the grants we have made. Questions?
Absolutely. That was wonderful. That's very interesting.
It's an interesting story.
It is. I think this is the first time we've been able to have somebody who was there present at the creation, as they say, and be before the creation for all practical purposes.
Yeah.
So the floor is now open for questions. Thank you very much for
My pleasure.
the really interesting.